And so we settle in. You can feel your body beginning to grow heavy, in the most pleasant way, in our time together tonight. There is nothing to examine, nothing to understand, only the gentle rhythm of a story, the story of one of the most peculiar cures the world has ever known. It's a tale that begins not with a doctor or a scientist, but with a simple, nagging headache. Your headache, in fact, as you begin to settle. Just one gentle thought. If this space feels like a comfort to you, you might consider a soft tap on the like or subscribe button. But only if that thought feels as effortless as a quiet breath. It's just a quiet way of letting me know you were here, resting for a while. And if you feel so inclined, you can leave a comment with your city and the time on the clock. It's always nice to know where in the world this story is finding a quiet home for the night. All right, let the shadows in your room grow long and soft. Maybe you can hear the faint sound of your own breathing, and together, let's allow the story to begin. The air inside the shop is thick. It's 100 smells all wrestling for attention, but none of them are winning. You can pick out the sharp scent of dried lavender, the sweet, cloying smell of licorice root, and something earthy and dark, like damp soil after a rainstorm. Dust motes, thick as tiny moths, dance in a single beam of sunlight slanting through the grimy window. Rhythmic throb behind your eyes that makes the dim light of the apothecary shop feel like a merciful kindness. You're here for a cure, nothing grand, just something to silence the drumbeat in your skull. The man behind the counter is ancient, his face a road map of wrinkles, his fingers stained with the ghosts of 1,000 potions. He listens to you describe your ailment, his head cocked to one side, a faint, knowing smile playing on his lips. A headache. A common complaint. Here's just the thing. He turns from you and shuffles towards the towering shelves that line the walls. They are crammed with jars of all shapes and sizes. You see cloudy glass bottles filled with leeches, fat and black, writhing slowly. There are ceramic pots labeled with elegant script promising cures from everything from melancholy to a common cough. He passes them all by. He passes the familiar herbs and the common tinctures. Instead, he stops before a small, locked cabinet made of dark, almost black wood. He produces a small, ornate iron key from a chain around his neck and opens it with a soft click. The inside is lined with velvet, a deep and faded reed. And on the velvet rests a single, beautifully crafted jar. It's not glass, but dark, polished stone, cool to the touch. He brings it back to the counter and sets it down with a reverence usually reserved for crown jewels. The finest, he whispers, his voice dry like rustling leaves. Direct from the sounds of Egypt. With a delicate twist, he removes the stone lid. The scent that wafts out is complex. It's musty, like a room that has been sealed for centuries. But there's also a strange sweetness to it, a hint of ancient resins, something spicy and foreign. He takes a tiny silver spoon, dips it into the jar, and scoops out a small mound of a dark, brownish black powder. He pours it onto a piece of clean parchment paper. It's a fine powder, but with a slightly gritty texture. Not like flour, more like very old, very dry dust. Mummy, he says, as if the word itself is a magic spell. There is nothing better, good for the head, for the stomach, for purifying the blood, even for mending a broken bone when mixed into a poultice. You stare at the dark powder, then back at him. Mummy, it's a word you've heard whispered in taverns and markets. A legendary cure minus all spoken of with awe. But you've never seen it before. This is the real article. The apothecary continues, leaning in conspiratorially. Not that counterfeit stuff they make these days. This comes from a true ancient. Baking, perhaps. You can tell by the aroma. The fakes never smell quite right. They lack the permanence. He seems quite proud of this, a true connoisseur of. And it's at this moment that the reality of the transaction gently lands in your mind. This isn't an herb. It's not a mineral. Mummy. The powder on the counter, the cure for your headache is a person, or at least it was a person. A long minus dead, preserved ground minus up Egyptian person. The thought is so profoundly strange that for a moment, you forget about the throbbing in your head. You're being offered a dose of powdered history, a pinch of a pharaoh to be stirred into a cup of wine and swallowed. The apothecary mentions the price, and you understand why it was kept in a locked cabinet. This is not a cure for the common farmer. Historians centuries from now will debate just how many people actually took this medicine versus how many apothecaries simply stocked it as a high-priced curiosity for the wealthy and the desperate. He carefully folds the parchment into a neat little packet, sealing your prescription. A spoonful in warm wine before bed, he instructs. You'll feel like a new man by morning. You pay the man, your coins clinking on the worn wooden counter. You walk out of the shop, the little packet feeling strangely heavy in your palm. The bright afternoon sun makes you squint, and the pounding in your head returns. You have the cure. But as you look down at the small paper parcel, you have to wonder, how on earth did medicine get this weird? How did raiding tombs in a far away and become a viable healthcare strategy? The story, you realize, must be even stranger than the cure itself. That little packet of brown powder in your hand feels heavier now, doesn't it? It's not just its physical weight, but the weight of the question you just asked yourself. How did this happen? To answer that, you have to let your mind drift, not to the Egypt of the pharaohs, but somewhere else entirely. A place of windswept mountain deep, ancient fissures in the earth. Picture the mountains of Persia. High, rugged, and old. And from the rocks of a particular mountain, a place some locals would call the Mummy Mountain, something strange happens. A thick, black, tar-like substance slowly oozes from cracks in the stone, especially during the heat of summer. It's natural asphalt or bitumen. The locals have known about it for centuries. They collected carefully this sticky, black goo. It has a powerful, petroleum-like smell. The word for this natural wax or bitumen is. This is where our story truly begins. Not with a corpse, but with a simple, sticky misunderstanding. A colossal linguistic blunder that would echo for 700 years. Now, let your mind travel west, across the deserts to Egypt. For millennia, the Egyptians have been perfecting the art of preservation. Their techniques are a closely guarded secret involving salts, resins, and a complex ritual process. And as part of this process, they often used that very same substance, bitumen. They imported it using the black, waterproof resin to coat the linen wrappings of their dead and to seal the lids of sarcophagi. It was an excellent preservative, a perfect sealant against moisture and time. Centuries pass. The age of the pharaohs fades into legend. New empires rise and fall. And then, travelers and scholars, particularly from the Arab world, begin to rediscover the ancient tombs. They crack open the stone sarcophagi and find the preserved bodies within, wrapped in linen and oft uncoated in a hard black, resinous shell. And what do they call this black substance they find caked onto the ancient dead? They use the word they already know for a valuable medicinal, black tar-like substance. They call it, do you see the slip? It's a subtle shift, but it changes everything. The original mumia was the substance itself oozing from a mountain. Now, the word mumia becomes associated with the embalmed bodies that were rooted with it. Historians still argue about the precise moment this confusion became common practice. Was it one influential Persian or Arab physician who misread an ancient text and declared that the most potent mumia came from the embalmed bodies of Egypt? Or was it a more gradual, creeping assumption among traders and apothecaries? A game of whispers across generations. The logic, however flawed, began to form. If the natural bitumen is good medicine, then the bitumen scraped from the bodies of long-dead kings, who were themselves considered divine, must be infinitely better. It has been aged, consecrated, and imbued with the spiritual essence of the person it preserved. It's a powerful idea, and it's a profitable one. Suddenly, the focus shifts from the mountains of Persia to the tombs along the Nile. Why mine for the raw ingredient when you can harvest the finished product? And from there, it's one last, small, and rather ghoulish leap of logic. Scraping the blackened resin off the mummy wrappings is a difficult, time-consuming task. And who's to say where the power of the resin ends and the power of the preserved body begins? Surely, the entire mummy has absorbed the virtues of the mumia over thousands of years. The flesh, the bones, the linen, it's all one potent medicine now. So, why not just grind the whole thing up? And just like that, the translation error becomes a 2- rating industry. A geological medicine becomes a ghoulish remedy. The demand for mummy, the thing completely eclipses the demand for mumia. The black doll, the original meaning, is almost forgotten, a footnote in a dusty medical text. The little packet in your hand is the end result of that centuries-long misunderstanding. You are not holding a mineral cure. You are holding the final, bizarre chapter of a story that began with a sticky black substance seeping from a Persian mountain. The question now is, how did this strange idea travel from the markets of Alexandria and Cairo all the way here to this town, to this apothecary, and into your palm? The journey of this bizarre medicine, from a linguistic mistake in the Middle East to a staple in your local European apothecary, required a very specific kind of delivery service. It needed people who were traveling constantly between these two worlds. People who were brave, devout, and perhaps a little bit inclined to pick up unusual souvenirs. You're thinking of merchants, maybe. And you're not wrong. But the real catalyst, the super-minor spreaders of this medical fad, were the Crusaders. Let your mind drift to the late 11th century. You're not in a dusty shop anymore. You're on the move. The sun is hotter, the air drier. You're part of a massive, clanking, sweating river of humanity flowing east. You are a knight, a pilgrim, a foot soldier, or maybe just a hopeful opportunist caught up in the fervor of the First Crusade. Your goal is sacred to reclaim the Holy Land. But along the way, the world opens up to you in ways you could never have imagined back in your damp, chilly corner of Europe. You see things. Spices you've never smelled, fabrics of impossible color and softness, architectural wonders that defy your understanding of stone and gravity. You are in the heart of a civilization far more advanced than your own in many ways, especially in the realms of science and medicine. The physicians of the Arab world are legendary. They have inherited the knowledge of the Greeks and Romans, and built upon it with centuries of their own discoveries. Their hospitals are clean, their surgical tools are refined, and their pharmacies are stocked with remedies you've never heard of. And one of the most famous of these remedies, prized by the great physicians like Avicenna and Arhazes, is mumia. You hear about it first from a translator, or perhaps a captured doctor forced to tend to your wounds. A powerful medicine for internal bleeding, for broken bones, for ailments of the spleen and liver. You're injured, let's say. A nasty gash on your leg that refuses to heal. The local European remedies, questionable poultices, and a lot of prayer haven't worked. But a physician in Antai haven't worked. But a physician in Antag, strange minor smelling soft, and within days, the wound is closing, the angry redness receding. The salve, he tells you, contains a small amount of precious mumia. You are understandably impressed. This is powerful stuff. The medicine of the East is clearly superior. When it's time to head home, your tour of duty complete, what do you bring back with you? A Saracen sword, perhaps? Some silk for your wife. And if you have the means, a small, precious vial of this miracle cure. You arrive back in your drafty stone castle in France, or your bustling merchant town in Italy. You're a hero. You've walked the lands of the Bible. And you've brought back secrets. When your lord falls from his horse and breaks a rib, you tell him of the wondrous black medicine. When a plague of fevers sweeps through the town, you remember the mumia that was sent to purify the blood. You become an ambassador for this strange new cure. You, and thousands of knights and pilgrims like you. Each one returning home with a story, and sometimes a sample. They are the perfect vectors for this idea, because they carry with them the authority of experience. They've seen it work. Of course, the mumia they were likely given was probably the original mineral-based bitumen. The historical record on this is, as scholars love to say, frustratingly ambiguous. Did the Crusaders know the difference? Did the physicians treating them distinguish between the geological substance and the one harvested from tombs? Almost certainly not consistently. By this point, the two were hopelessly entangled. The story was just too good a medicine made from the bodies of ancient kings, preserved for eternity in a holy land. It was exotic and mystical, and it came with a fantastic backstory. There's a strange and morbid little fact here. Some of the earliest European recipes that call for mumia don't just recommend eating it. They also suggest it can be used to graft skin from one person to another, a sort of proto-plastic surgery. The idea was that the powerful preservative nature of the mumia would prevent the grafted skin from rotting. It's a testament to the almost magical powers they attributed to the substance. Whether anyone actually tried this successfully is, thankfully, lost to history. So, the Crusaders returning home over decades bring the demand with them. Apothecaries in Venice and Genoa, the great trading hubs of the Mediterranean, start getting requests. Do you have any of that Egyptian medicine? The black powder, the stuff the knights are talking about. The merchants, ever savvy, see an opportunity. They send their ships to the port of Alexandria with new shopping lists. No longer just silks and spices, but something far more macabre. The seed has been planted. The returning crusaders, with their tales of wonder and their little pouches of black powder, have created a market. They've unknowingly set the stage for a trade that will desecrate thousands of tombs and turn human bodies into a commodity. All in the name of good health. The next step is to make the strange, foreign remedy feel like it belongs. It needs to fit into the European way of thinking about the body, about sickness, and about the very nature of medicine itself. So the demand is there, simmering in the towns and castles of Europe thanks to your returning comrades minus arms. But for a medicine to be truly accepted, it can't just be a strange souvenir from a faraway land. It has to make sense. It needs to fit into the grand, overarching theory of how the universe, and by extension your own body, actually works. And in medieval and Renaissance Europe, that theory was all about balance, the theory of the four humors. Let's step out of the apothecary for a moment and into a physician's study. It's cleaner here, more scholarly, books line the walls, heavy leather bound tomes written in Latin. There's a chart on the wall, a complex diagram of the human body, but it doesn't show muscles or nerves. It shows the flow of the four essential fluids, the humors. The physician, a man with a serious expression and a long, velvet robe, explains it to you. Your body, he says, is a microcosm of the world. Just as the world is made of four elements, earth, water, air, and fire, your body is governed by four corresponding humors. There's black bile, which is cold and dry like earth. There's phlegm, cold and moist like water. Blood, hot and dry like fire. Your health, he tells you with absolute certainty, is simply a matter of keeping these four humors in perfect balance. Every illness you could possibly experience, from your nagging headache to the deadliest plague, is caused by an imbalance. Too much phlegm gives you a cold. Too much black bile makes you melancholic. Too much yellow bile makes you angry and choleric. The goal of all medicine, therefore, is to restore that delicate equilibrium. How do you do that? By introducing substances that have the opposite qualities of the humor that's out of whack. If you have a fever, which is an excess of heat, yellow bile or blood, you need a remedy that is cooling. If you feel a damp trail in your bones, an excess of phlegm, you need something warming and drying. It's all very logical, in its own way, a beautifully complete, if completely wrong, system. Now where does a ground minus up Egyptian mummy fit into this elegant system? This is the brilliant, if morbid, piece of medical marketing that allows mumia to take root. You see, the original mumia, that black, sticky bitumen from the mountains of Persia, was classified by ancient physicians like Galen as being hot and dry in nature. This made it a perfect remedy for ailments caused by an excess of cold and moist humors like phlegm. It was a drying agent, a warming tonic. When the mumia made from actual mummies arrives in Europe, it inherits this classification. After all, what could be drier than a body that has been lying in a hot, sandy tomb for 3,000 years? And the resins and spices used in the embalming process, like myrrh and cassia, were also considered to be hot and dry. So, powdered mummy fits perfectly into the humoral theory. It is a potent, warming, drying medicine. The physician points back to his chart. Your headache, he might explain, is caused by a damp, cold vapor rising from your stomach to your head. An excess of phlegm. What you need is something powerfully hot and dry to counteract it. And what could be more powerfully hot and dry than the preserved essence of a desert king? But there's another layer to it, something that goes beyond the simple mechanics of hot and cold, wet and dry. It's the idea that a medicine contains the spirit or virtue of its source. You eat the heart of a lion to gain courage. You drink willow bark tea to soothe a fever because the willow tree thrives in damp places and thus has a cooling nature. This is the doctrine of signatures, the belief that God marked everything in nature with a clue to its medicinal purpose. And what is the most remarkable quality of a mummy? It lasts. It resists decay and corruption for millennia. Therefore, if you consume it, you are consuming its most powerful virtue, permanence, longevity, incorruption. It was thought to be the ultimate preservative, not just for the dead, but for the living too. By taking it, you were literally absorbing a dose of anti-decay. This made it the perfect medicine for anything that seemed like a process of corruption in the body: ulcers, wounds, internal bleeding, even the plague, which was seen as a rapid, terrifying decay of the flesh. There's a strange little tidbit here that shows how deeply this idea was embedded. Some medical texts from the period suggested that the best mumia came not just from any mummy, but from the bodies of people who had died violently and suddenly, like gladiators or executed criminals. The reasoning: their bodies were still filled with a powerful life force, an unspent vitality that had been abruptly cut off. This vital spirit was thought to be preserved in the flesh, making for an extra potent medicine. This is a concept that would, quite gruesomely, come back into play later in our story. Historians are still debating how much of this was cynical marketing by apothecaries and how much was genuine belief on the part of physicians. But in the end, it doesn't matter. The story was just too compelling. Mumia wasn't just some weird fun powder anymore. It was a sophisticated, powerful medicine that made perfect sense within the most advanced scientific framework of the day. It had a clear function in the humoral system, and it possessed a powerful, almost magical virtue of preservation. The stage is set. The theory is in place. All that's left is for you to actually, well, take your medicine. The theory is sound, at least to the medieval mind. The logic, however twisted it seems now, is coherent. But you are standing there, with your little packet of mumia, and the time for theorizing is over. It's time for the practical application, the first awkward taste. Let's imagine you're not a customer anymore, but a young apprentice in that same apothecary shop. It's your job to prepare the remedies. The master apothecary has just acquired a new shipment. It didn't arrive in a small, elegant stone jar. It arrived in a large, rough wooden crate, smelling faintly of the sea and something else, something musty and ancient. Your master pries open the lid with a crowbar. Inside, nestled in straw, is not a powder but a thing. It's a fragment of a human body. Perhaps a forearm, the skin a dark, leathery brown, stretched tight over the bone. Or maybe a detached head, its wrappings stained and frayed, a few strands of brittle hair still clinging to the scalp. It's dry hard as a piece of old wood, and surprisingly light. This is the raw material. Your job is to turn this artifact into medicine. The first step is to break it down. There are no delicate scientific instruments here. You take the mummified limb to the back room to a large, heavy mortar and pestle made of stone or bronze, usually reserved for grinding tough roots and minerals, and you begin to pound. It's hard work. The tissue is leathery, and the bones are brittle but tough. The sound is a dry, cracking, percussive rhythm in the quiet of the shop. A fine, dark dust begins to fill the air, and you have to be careful not to breathe too much of it in. The smell is overwhelming. Not the smell of immense age. It's the scent of ancient linen, dried resins, desiccated human flesh, and the faint, unmistakable smell of the dust of the tomb itself. This process was anything but standardized. Some apothecaries might meticulously separate the flesh from the bone, believing one to be more potent than the other. Others would just smash the whole thing together, bone, skin, wrappings, and all into a single, homogeneous powder. Some of the more fastidious practitioners might try to wash the fragments first, though it's hard to imagine what good that would do. There was a genuine, and sometimes heated, debate among physicians and apothecaries about which part of the mummy was the most medicinally effective. The great surgeon Père, who would later become a fierce critic of the practice, noted with disgust that some believed the most valuable part was the dried and powdered heart, while others preferred the brain. It was a macabre form of connoisseur soup, treating the human body like a side of beef, with different cuts having different values. You grind and grind until you have a coarse dark powder. It's not the fine uniform dust your master keeps in the special jar out front. This is the rough stuff, full of tiny splinters of bone and fibers from the linen wrappings. It has to be sieved, sometimes multiple times, through fine cloth to get the final, medicinal minus-grade product. What you're left with is the mumia. This is what goes into the jars. This is what you sell to the wealthy nobleman for his gout, or to the desperate mother for her child's persistent cough. And how is it taken? Rarely on its own. The taste, as you can imagine, would be challenging. It was almost always mixed with something else to make it more palatable. You might be instructed to blend the powder with honey or molasses to form a thick paste, or perhaps dissolve it in a strong, sweet wine or ale, which was a very common method. For external use, it would be mixed with fat or wax to create a salve or a plaster. You watch as a wealthy merchant comes into the shop complaining of a deep, racking cough. Your master nods sagely, measures out a small spoonful of your freshly ground powder, and mixes it into a goblet of dark red wine. He stirs it with a glass rod. The powder doesn't fully dissolve. It creates a murky, gritty suspension in the wine. The merchant takes the goblet, mutters a quick prayer, and drinks it down in one go, wincing slightly at the texture. He pays handsomely on leave, confident that he has consumed the very best medicine money can buy. One of the strangest and most specific uses for mumia was as a treatment for internal bleeding, particularly after a bad fall. The logic was that the bitumen and resins in the mummy acted as a sort of internal sealant, a glue that would find the source of the bleeding and patch it up from the inside. The great philosopher Francis Bacon, a man of science, was a believer. He wrote that mumia had a property of stanching of blood. It's a bizarre image, isn't it? Swallowing a powdered person in the hopes that they would reassemble themselves inside you just enough to plug a leak. So the first real taste, the first genuine dose of mummy-based medicine in Europe, is not a refined, clinical experience. It's a crude, dusty, and physically demanding process, transforming a sacred object of antiquity into a coarse powder. It's a mouthful of grit and ancient dust, masked by the sweetness of wine or honey, and it's a moment where belief has to be stronger than your gag reflex. But believe they did, because soon, this strange and awkward medicine was about to get a major boost, an endorsement from the highest echelons of society. This strange, dusty medicine, born of a misunderstanding undelivered by crusaders, has now been ground into a fine powder. It has a place in the medical theories of the day, but to truly become a phenomenon, a fad that would last for centuries, it needed more than just a good story and a place in an apothecary's back room. It needed a celebrity endorsement, and it got one. In fact, it got a whole series of them. The trend went viral by 16th century standards when it became a medicine fit for a king. Picture the royal court of France in the early 1500 seconds. The air is thick with perfume, intrigue, and the rustle of silk. This is a world of immense power and equally immense anxiety. Your life, even as a king, is fragile. A minor infection, a bad fall from a horse, a sudden fever, any of these could be a death sentence. In this gilded cage, you are always searching for an edge, a secret weapon to preserve your health and your dynasty. And here, in the glittering court of King Francis I, mumia finds its most influential champion. Francis was a true Renaissance man, a patron of the arts, a skilled diplomat, and a man obsessed with his health. He was also a man of action, frequently on the military campaign trail, and he never, ever traveled without his personal supply of mumia. It was part of his royal first-aid kit. If he or one of his nobles took a tumble on the battlefield, or in the jousting yard, the first thing the royal surgeon would reach for was the king's personal stash of powdered Egyptian. It was said he carried a pouch of it with him at all times, a mixture of mumia and ground rhubarb, another expensive imported medicine. Imagine the scene: the King of France, one of the most powerful men in the world, getting a scrape and immediately reaching for his personal baggie of ground minus up mummy. His belief in it was absolute. This was not folk medicine, this was royal medicine. And when the king does something, the court follows. Suddenly, every duke, baron, and count needs their own supply. It becomes a status symbol, like owning a fine horse or wearing Italian velvet. To offer your guest a dose of your best mumia for his ailment is an act of profound hospitality. It says, I am wealthy enough and sophisticated enough to afford the very finest medicine from the Orient. The royal endorsement gives the practice an unshakable legitimacy. If it's good enough for the king, who has access to the best physicians in the world, then it must be effective. The lingering doubts, the faint whispers that maybe, just maybe, it's a little strange to be eating people are silenced. This royal fascination wasn't limited to France. Across the Channel in England, the medicine also found favor with the elite. It's said that King Charles II, after the restoration of the monarchy, was a fan. He didn't just eat it, he created his own personal concoction called the King's Drops. The main ingredients were alcohol and a powdered human skull. While not technically Egyptian mumia, it sprang from the very same tradition of corpse minus-based medicine. He believed it was a universal cure minus all, and he would pay handsomely for skulls, particularly those of young men who had met a sudden, violent end. Again, that idea of capturing a potent, unspent life force. There is a bizarre and macabre little anecdote from this period. Sometimes apothecaries would receive an entire intact mummy. To prove its authenticity and display its quality to wealthy customers, they would set it up in their shop window. Imagine walking down a street in London or Paris and seeing a 3,000-year-old Egyptian corpse standing in a shop display like a mannequin. A grim advertisement for the miracle cure available within. It's the ultimate freshness guarantee, in a very strange sense. The royal seal of approval has a profound effect on the market. The price of mumia skyrockets. What was once a rare curiosity becomes a valuable commodity. Historians are still debating the exact economics of the trade, but it's clear that genuine, high-quality mumia, that is, mumia from an actual ancient Egyptian tomb, became astronomically expensive. This, of course, only increased its desirability among the wealthy. The endorsement of kings and queens solidifies the medicine's place in the official pharmacopoeia, the list of recognized and approved drugs. For centuries to come, medical textbooks written by the most esteemed professors at universities like Padua and Montpellier will include chapters on the proper sourcing, preparation, and application of mumia. It is taught to generations of doctors as a standard and effective treatment. So, your little packet of powder is no longer just a strange folk remedy. It's a medicine with a royal pedigree. It's a luxury good. It's a symbol of your wealth and your connection to the highest levels of society. When you swallow it, you're not just taking medicine. You're participating in an elite ritual, a practice sanctioned and performed by kings. This royal blessing is the final piece of the puzzle. The demand is now firmly established, the theory is accepted, and its reputation is golden. The supply chain, however, is about to come under some serious and very grisly pressure. With kings and nobles now clamoring for it, mumia has completed its transformation. It's no longer just a medicine, it's a luxury brand, and like any in-demand product, it needs a reliable retail presence. It needs to move from the hands of savvy traders and sailors into a respectable professional setting. It needs to find a home on the well-stocked pharmacy shelf. You are back in the apothecary shop, but it's a different one now. This isn't a small, dusty corner shop. This is a grand establishment in a major European city like London, Paris, or Amsterdam. The kind of place that supplies physicians to the royal court. The wooden counters are polished to a high sheen, the brass scales glitter, and the rows upon rows of jars are clean and meticulously organized. It smells of money and medicine in equal measure, and there, right between the jar of expensive imported cloves and the pot of rare unicorn horn, which was usually narwhal tusk, But that's another story. Is the jar of Mumia. It's not hidden away in a locked cabinet anymore. It's out on display, a sign of the shop's quality and prestige. By the 16th and 17th centuries, this becomes the norm. Mumia is a standard ingredient, a core part of the apothecary's inventory. It's listed in the official Pharmacopoeia S, the big, thick books that catalogued every known drug and its preparation. The London Pharmacopoeia of 1618, for instance, lists Mumia as an official medicine. This was some fringe, under the minus counter-treatment. This was mainstream. As mainstream, you, as the customer, can now walk in and buy it by the ounce, or even by the pound if you were extravagantly wealthy. It was sold in several forms. You could buy the raw material, a blackened hand, a piece of a torso if you wanted to do grinding yourself to ensure its purity. This was the most expensive and most trusted option. Or, you could buy the pre-ground powder, which was more convenient but carried the risk of being diluted with less savory and less expensive material. The apothecary, a man who sees himself as a scientist and a professional, takes his Mumia very seriously. He can talk to you for an hour about its different grades and qualities. This batch, he might say, holding a jar up to the light, is from the tomb of a priest. You can tell by the fineness of the linen it was wrapped in. Much more potent than the common stock, he would discuss the aroma, the texture, the color, all the markers of a connoisseur. He might even have a small piece on a plate for you to examine, a tiny fragment of desiccated flesh, as a jeweler might show you a loose diamond. Here's a particularly strange detail. Some apothecaries claimed that the best Mumia came from bodies that were embalmed with a specific mixture of fragrant spices, like cinnamon and myrrh. The idea was that these spices, themselves valuable medicines, had infused the body over the centuries, creating a sort of super-remedy. The most prized mummies were those that were said to exude a sweet, spicy smell when broken open. They were called sweet mummies, and they fetched the highest prices. This created a very real problem for the apothecary: quality control. How could he be sure he was getting the real thing? The supply chain was long and murky, stretching all the way back to the deserts of Egypt. The potential for fraud was enormous. An unscrupulous merchant could easily grind up some old leather, mix it with sand, animal blood, and a bit of asphalt, and sell it as premium-grade Mumia. Scholars are still trying to figure out, through chemical analysis of surviving medical pulp, just what percentage of the Mumia sold in Europe was fake. Some estimates suggest it was the vast majority. To combat this, apothecaries developed their own crude tests. They would smell it, of course. A good, authentic Mumia was supposed to have a specific, not minus to minus and pleasant, balsamic aroma. A foul or rotten smell was a dead giveaway of a counterfeit. They would also taste a small amount. It was supposed to be bitter and pungent. Another test was to burn a small amount of the powder. The color and smell of the smoke were thought to be indicators of its origin and purity. It's an incredible image. A respected professional in the heart of London, a member of the Worshipful Society of Apothecaries, carefully burning a pinch of powdered human to see if the smoke smells authentically ancient enough for his discerning clientele. The presence of Mumia on the pharmacy shelf, sitting alongside legitimate and helpful botanical remedies, tells you everything you need to know about the state of medicine. It was a world where tradition, magic, and science were all tangled together. The apothecary saw no contradiction in selling you willow bark for your fever, which actually works, as it contains silicin, the basis for aspirin, and then, in the next breath, selling you powdered mummy for your broken leg. Both were ancient remedies, recommended by the great physicians of the past. Both were part of his art and mystery. The well-mined stock shelf is a symbol of stability. The trade is mature, the demand is constant, the product is integrated into the system. But this stability in the European pharmacy is creating immense instability somewhere else. To keep these polished jars full, someone has to go out and get the raw material, and that is a dirty, dangerous, and deeply sacrilegious business. The neat, orderly world of the European apothecary is built upon a foundation of chaos and desecration thousands of miles away. The polished jars on the apothecary's shelves in London and Paris are kept full by a long and brutal supply chain. And it begins with you. Not you as a customer, not anymore. Now, you are someone else entirely. You are an Egyptian, a farmer, perhaps, living in a small village on the banks of the Nile in the 16th century. The river gives you life, but the land is unforgiving. Then the taxes from your Ottoman rulers are high. You are poor and you are looking for a way to survive. And all around you, beneath the sands that you plow, lies a vast, untapped resource, a buried treasure. The dead. To the world of your ancestors, the tombs that honeycomb the cliffs of the Valley of the Kings and the vast necropolis of Sakar were sacred spaces. They were eternal homes, portals to the afterlife, filled with treasures meant to serve the soul on its journey. To you, they are a business opportunity. A dangerous, illegal, but potentially very lucrative one. You become a tomb raider. This isn't the adventurous with mind-scracking archaeology you might imagine. This is a grim and desperate trade. It's not about finding gold, though you might get lucky. It's about finding bodies. The insatiable European demand for mumia has created a powerful economic incentive to desecrate the graves of your own ancestors. The work is done at night, under the cold, indifferent light of the moon and stars. You gather with a small group of men from your village, your cousins and brothers. You carry simple tools, ropes, shovels, heavy mallets. You move quietly through the desert, your bare feet making soft sounds on the sand. You know the landscape intimately. You know the subtle depressions in the ground that hint at a hidden shaft, the places where the wind has swept the sand away to reveal the corner of a buried stone structure. Finding an undiscovered tomb is the goal, but it's rare. Most of the time, you are entering tombs that have been plundered many times before, starting in antiquity. But the ancient thieves were after gold, jewelry, and fine pottery. They left the bodies. To you, the bodies are the treasure. You find the entrance a dark, rectangular hole in the ground, often filled with rubble. You light a torch, a bundle of reeds dipped in oil, and begin your descent. The air that flows out of the tomb is cool and utterly still, carrying a scent that has been trapped for thousands of years. It's the smell of dry dust, stone, and something else, a faint, dry, perfumed stillness. The work is perilous. The ancient shafts can be unstable, and the risk of a collapse is very real. There are scorpions and snakes to worry about. And there is the constant fear of being caught. The local authorities, under pressure from the Ottoman governors in Cairo, officially forbid this practice. If you are caught, the punishment is severe, a brutal flogging, or worse. But the lure of the piastres, the coins the European agents will pay, is stronger than your fear. Once inside, the torchlight flickers, casting long dancing shadows on walls covered in painted figures. Gods with the heads of animals, hieroglyphs telling stories you cannot read. These are the sacred guardians of the dead, but to you, they are just decorations in your place of work. You and your men move through the chambers, your focus entirely on the sarcophagus. Sometimes they are massive, made of granite, and impossible to move. You use your mallets to smash a hole in the lid. Other times, the bodies are simply stacked in niches carved into the rock walls, wrapped in linen but not protected by a coffin. These are the easy ones. You pull the bodies out. They are stiff, brittle, and often wrapped in layers of linen so dense they feel like plaster casts. They are awkward to handle. You tie ropes around them and haul them, bumping and scraping up the shaft and out into the moonlight. It is a deeply unsacred act. A quiet, methodical desecration driven by poverty. There's a small, sad detail that often gets overlooked. The mummies of children were also harvested. While they were smaller and yielded less product, some believed that their mumia had a special purity, making it particularly good for certain ailments. It's a chilling thought. A desperate father in the 16th century, pulling the preserved body of a small child who died 30 centuries earlier from its resting place, all to feed his own living children. Historians still argue about the scale of this industry. How many tombs were emptied? How many hundreds of thousands, or even millions, of mummies were destroyed to feed this European appetite? The numbers are impossible to calculate precisely, but the evidence suggests it was a massive, sustained operation lasting for centuries. It was an environmental catastrophe for the archaeological record, destroying untold amounts of historical information forever. At the end of the night, you have a collection of bodies, lying starkly on the desert sand. You wrap them in rough blankets to conceal them, unload them onto your donkeys. The next step is to get them to the dealers, the middlemen who operate in the larger towns, who will then sell them to the European merchants waiting in the port of Alexandria. You have become the first link in a global supply chain. You are a resurrection man, but in reverse. You don't bring the dead back to life, you pull them from their eternal rest to be consumed, piece by piece, an ocean away. You have violated a deep taboo. But your family will eat this week. As the sun begins to rise, casting a pink glow over the eastern cliffs, you laid your laden donkeys away from the silent, empty tomb, leaving nothing behind but broken stone and scattered dust. The decision to become a tomb raider wasn't made lightly. The fear of getting caught is one thing, but there's a deeper fear, isn't there? A fear of the spirits, of the ancient curses that are said to guard these places. Your rational mind, the part that needs to feed your family, dismisses them as old stories. But now, as you stand at the threshold of a newly discovered tomb, a fissure in the rock that your cousin found by chance, those old stories stay a little more real. The sun has set, and the desert is plunging into a profound, chilling cold. The silence is absolute, broken only by the wind whispering over the tops of the dunes and the nervous breathing of the men around you. This time you're not entering a gnome-plundered tomb. This one feels different. The seal on the entrance, a simple mud-brick wall, is still intact. No one has entered this place since the priests of Anubis left, 3,000 years ago. You take your turn with the mallet, swinging it against the mud bricks. The sound is a dull, muffled thud, strangely loud in the immense quiet. With each blow, a puff of fine, ancient dust explodes into the air. Finally, a section of the wall crumbles, revealing a perfect, impenetrable darkness within. A wave of cool, still air, heavy with the scent of sealed time, washes over your face. It smells of resin, natron salt, and something else. Something indescribably ancient, like the smell of a star. You are the first one to enter. You have to be. You are the leader of this small crew. You wrap a cloth around your nose and mouth, light your torch, and take a deep breath of the outside air before lowering yourself into the opening. The torch flame sputters for a moment, starved of oxygen. Before catching again, you drop down onto a floor that is covered in a fine layer of dust, as soft as flour. The light from your torch pushes back the darkness, but only just. You are in a small, antechamber. The walls are covered in vibrant paintings that look as if they were finished yesterday. A procession of gods, a line of servants carrying offerings, a beautiful woman in a white linen dress playing a harp. They seem to move, their painted eyes following you. Your heart is hammering against your ribs. Every rational thought is screaming at you. This is a sacred place. This is wrong. But the image of the coins the dealer will give you is a powerful counter-minus argument. You move forward, your footsteps the first to mark this dust in millennia. You enter the main burial chamber. And there, in the center of the room, sits a magnificent stone sarcophagus. Its lid is carved in the shape of the man who lies within, his face serene, his arms crossed over his chest, holding the crooked flail, symbols of royalty. Or at least, nobility. This is a good one. A very good one. Around the sarcophagus are the objects of the dead. Painted wooden chests, clay jars still sealed with wax, a small, elegant chariot, now dismantled. Your eyes scan them for gold, but you see none. It takes all of you to push the heavy lid aside, the stone grinding against stone with a deafening shriek that echoes through the silent chambers. The moment it's opened, you lean over, holding your torch high. The body inside is perfectly preserved, wrapped in countless layers of pale, clean linen. A golden funerary mask, inlaid with blue lapis lazuli, stares up at you with wide, empty eyes. For a moment, you are frozen. It is a moment of profound, terrible intimacy. You are the first person to see this face, this effigy of a long-dead soul, in 3,000 years. You are a trespasser, a violator of a sacred trust. One of the strangest things archaeologists later discovered about these tombs was the presence of small mummified animals. Cats, ibises, even crocodiles, all carefully wrapped and placed alongside their human companions. Imagine finding not just the nobleman in his coffin, but his favorite pet cat, perfectly preserved, tucked into a small box beside him. This wasn't just a burial, it was an attempt to recreate a life, an entire household for eternity. An eternity you are about to shatter for a few coins. The moment of our passes replaced by the grim reality of your work. You reach in and begin to lift the body. It's rigid and heavy. You and your cousin hoist it out of its stone bed and lay it on the dusty floor. You work quickly now, stripping away the outer layers of linen, searching for the small amulets and charms that were often tucked within the wrappings. A carved scare beetle, a tiny ankh. These have some value, but not much. There's a constant tension among historians about whether the tomb raiders of this period had any sense of the historical significance of what they were doing. Did they feel any connection to these ancient ancestors? The consensus is largely no. The cultural and religious gap was too vast. To a 16th-century Muslim or Coptic Christian farmer, the pagan, animal-headed gods painted on the walls were alien and meaningless. The bodies were a skin-pure resource, like a strange, dry type of lumber harvested from underground. You get the body, and a few smaller ones you find in a side chamber, out of the tomb and up into the cool night air. You don't reseal the entrance. You just leave it open to the desert, a gaping wound. The sacred stillness is broken forever. The air, trapped for millennia, is now mingling with the common air of the world. The paintings will begin to fade. The dust of the outside world will settle on everything. You load your donkeys and start the long walk back. You don't look back at the hole in the ground. You have what you came for, but as you walk, you can't shake the image of that serene, golden face staring up at you from the darkness. You tell yourself it's just a job, but tonight, sleep might not come so easily. The night in the valley is over. You've secured the grim prize. But getting a few desiccated bodies out of a hole in the ground is only the first, and perhaps easiest, part of the journey. Now you have to move the product. You are entering the world of macabre logistics, the shadowy process of transforming a sacred ancient king into a piece of international cargo. You lead your donkeys away from the cliffs and toward the river, sticking to the hidden paths of the desert rather than the main roads. You need to get your haul to a local dealer, a middleman who has the connections to move it further down the line. This man operates out of a quiet courtyard in a nearby town. His legitimate business, perhaps selling pottery or livestock, providing the perfect cover for his more lucrative and illicit sideline. He examines your find by the light of a flickering oil lamp. He's not an archaeologist. He doesn't care about the dynasty or the name on the sarcophagus. He's a merchant, assessing the quality of his goods. He pokes at the wrappings, smells the body, and even breaks off a small piece to check the color and dryness of the flesh beneath. Too brittle, he might complain, trying to lower the price. This one was not prepared with the best resins. The Europeans prefer them to be more pliable. It's a bizarre negotiation. You haggle over the price of human remains as if they were sacks of grain. A large, preserved adult male is worth the most. A smaller body, or one that is damaged or fragmented, is worth less. You argue, you gesture, and finally, you agree on a price. The dealer counts out the coins, and your direct involvement in the process is over. You can now go home and feed your family. You try not to think about what happens next. But we will. The dealer now has a collection of mummies from you and other local raiding teams. His next challenge is concealment and transportation. Moving a whole, intact human body, even a very old one, is conspicuous. The authorities, while often corruptible, do make occasional crackdowns to appease the Ottoman governor. So the bodies often dismembered. They are broken down into more manageable, easier -to-high pieces. Arms, legs, torsos, heads, performed by candlelight in a hidden cellar. These pieces are then packed into ordinary -looking crates or sacks. They are disguised as something else. They might be hidden amongst bales of cotton, or packed into barrels and covered with a layer of salted fish. The goal is to get them loaded onto a riverboat, a felucca, heading north down the Nile to the bustling port city of Alexandria, without attracting the attention of any officials. A particularly strange and dark detail of this trade involves the use of bitumen itself as a concealer, sometimes to make fragmented or lower quality mummies look more like the prized, black coated authentic ones. Dealers would coat the bodies in a fresh layer of hot black tar. It's the ultimate irony, they were slathering the very substance that started the whole misunderstanding onto bodies to make them look more like the product of that misunderstanding. It's a level of fraud that's almost artistic in its circular logic. Let's say you are now a European merchant's agent in Alexandria. Your job is to source the goods and get them onto a ship bound for Venice, Marseille, or Amsterdam. You don't go out into the desert yourself. That's far too dangerous. You work with a network of these local dealers. You place your orders, specify the quantity and quality you need, and wait for the deliveries to be smuggled into your warehouse in the city. Your warehouse, located in the labyrinthine alleys near the port, is a strange and grim place. In one corner, you have sacks of cloves and peppercorns. In another, bolts of fine Egyptian cotton. And in the back, under lock and key, is your inventory of human remains. The air is a strange mixture of exotic spices and the dry, musty scent of the dead. You too are a connoisseur. You have to be. You need to be able to spot the fakes, the poorly preserved, or the ones that have been doctored by the dealers. You are buying for a discerning market after all. You might even have a small testing kit, a hammer to check for brittlences, a knife to scrape away the wrappings, and a candle to perform the burn test, checking for the correct aroma of the smoke. Once you've assembled a shipment, the final and most crucial step is getting it through the port authorities and onto a European vessel. This almost always involves bribery. A customs official is paid to look the other way to sign the manifest without inspecting the contents of certain special crates. Historians studying the shipping records of this period are often frustrated because the cargo is never listed as mummies. It's listed as bales of cloth, crates of medicinal herb, or some other vague term. The true nature of the cargo is a secret hidden in plain sight. Finally, the crate filled with the dismembered remains of a once revered nobleman who has been violently torn from his eternal rest, haggled over, broken apart, and packed like firewood is hoisted onto a ship. It sits in the dark, swaying hold for the weeks long journey across the Mediterranean. It shares the space with barrels of wine, cages of live animals, and all the other mundane cargo of international trade. The sacred has become profane, and the profane has become profane, and the profane has become a simple, if rather unusual, commodity. The next time it sees the light of day, it will be on a European dock, ready for the final stage of its journey to the apothecary's shelf. The ship finally docks. The journey across the Mediterranean is over. But your cargo of human remains doesn't move directly from the ship's hold to the quiet, respectable apothecary shops. There's an intermediate step, a chaotic and utterly surreal marketplace where the raw materials of this trade are bought and sold in the open. You are now in Alexandria, or perhaps Cairo, and you are heading to the mummy market. It's not an officially designated place, of course. There's no sign proclaiming mummy market here. It's a corner of a large bazaar, a sprawling, labyrinthine souk already overwhelming to the senses. The air is thick with the smell of roasting coffee, exotic spices, animal dung, and the sweat of cacophony of vendors shouting, donkeys braying, and the rhythmic clang of a coppersmith's hammer. And amidst all this vibrant life, there is a quiet, morbid corner dedicated to the dead. You see it before you smell it. Piles of human remains laid out on dusty carpets or rough burlap sacks. It's a butcher shop of the ancient. There are stacks of detached limbs, sorted by size. There are pyramids of heads, some still wrapped in their original linen, others bare skulls, their empty sockets staring blankly at the bright Egyptian sun. Torsos, some with the ribcage broken open, are laid out in rows. The vendors are not shadowy, furtive figures. They are ordinary merchants, sitting cross-legged beside their wares, sipping tea and fanning themselves in the heat. They call out to you as you pass, the same way a man selling melons would. The finest quality. One might shout, gesturing to a particularly preserved forearm. From a royal tomb. Very powerful medicine. You, a European agent or a ship's captain looking to fill some extra cargo space, approach the stall. This is where the real business happens, where wholesale quantities are bought and sold. You can buy by the piece, or you can buy by weight, the cantiar, which was roughly £100. Imagine a merchant placing a severed human head on one side of a large brass scale, and then adding weights to the other, haggling with you over the price per pound. The scene is almost impossible for a modern mind to fully grasp. The complete and utter commodification of the human body. There is no sense of sacredness, no hint of scientific curiosity. It is purely a commercial transaction. A young boy might walk by, casually swatting a fly from the leathery face of a long miner's dead priest. A stray dog might sniff at a pile of discarded femurs. One of the most sought minus-after items in these markets was mummy brains. While the ancient Egyptians usually removed the brain through the nose during mummification, this wasn't always the case, or the process was incomplete. Some mummies were found with their desiccated brains still inside their skulls. These were considered a particular delicacy, a potent cure for headaches and dizziness, based on the principle of like yours like. A vendor might crack open a skull with a hammer, right there in the market, to show you the quality of the dry brain matter within. There's a famous and likely embellished account from a 16th-century French traveler named Pierre Bellon. He described seeing merchants hacking up mummies with axes to sell them to traders, and claimed that he had trouble finding a single ancient tomb in Egypt that had not already been violated by the mummy miners hunters. While he may have exaggerated for dramatic effect, his account speaks to a truth that historians still grapple with. This was not a small, secret trade, and brutally efficient industry. There's a buyer. You have to be savvy. This is a completely unregulated market. Fraud is rampant. A common trick was to take old, fragmented bodies, perhaps of commoners from simple pit graves, and wrap them in finer, newer looking linen to pass them off as high quality nobles. Another was to coat everything in a thick layer of black bitumen, hiding the poor quality of the body beneath and making it look like the authentic mumia that was so prized. You examine the merchandise carefully. You are looking for bodies that are firm, dry, and have that specific, slightly sweet, resinous smell. You avoid anything that smells damp or putrid. You might break off a finger or a toe to inspect the cross-minus section of the bone and desiccated tissue. After much haggling, you agree on a price for a dozen bodies, or perhaps a few £100 of assorted pieces. Your purchase is then wrapped in sackcloth, loaded onto the backs of porters, and carried through the bustling market, past the stalls selling dates and perfumes, down to the docks where your ship is waiting. The transaction is complete. You have just purchased several dozen people. Their long journey from a silent tomb to the noisy chaos of the market is over. Now, they are just cargo ready to cross the sea and begin the final leg of their journey into the medicine cabinets of Europe. The image of the marketplace, with its casual, sun-drenched brutality, is a stark reminder of just how deeply this bizarre practice was woven into the fabric of the early modern economy. For decades, even centuries, this grim supply chain, stretching from the moonlit tombs of the Nile to the sun-drenched markets of Alexandria, somehow manages to meet the relentless European demand. The ships keep arriving in Venice and Marseille, their holds filled with the grim cargo needed to keep the apothecary jars full. But no resource, not even the dead of an entire civilization, is infinite. And inevitably, a crisis begins to brew. The supply of genuine, high-quality, ancient Egyptian mummies starts to run out. You are now an apothecary in the late 17th century. Your business is thriving, but you're facing a problem that worries you deeply. Your trusted supplier, the Venetian merchant who has provided you with the finest mumia for 20 years, is becoming unreliable. His shipments are less frequent. The quality of the product he sends is declining. The price is climbing to astronomical levels. He sends you letters of apology, full of excuses. The Ottoman authorities in Egypt are cracking down on the tomb raiders. The journey is more perilous than ever. But you know the real reason. It's a simple matter of supply and demand. After centuries of relentless, industrial scale looting, the most accessible tombs have been emptied. The tomb raiders are now forced to go deeper into the desert to search for more remote and hidden burial sites. This makes their work more dangerous, more time-consuming, and therefore more expensive. They pass those costs on to the dealers in Cairo, who pass them on to the merchants in Alexandria, who pass them on to your supplier in Venice, who is now passing them on to you. The good mummies, the preserved nobles from the New Kingdom, the called sweet mummies with their fragrant resins are becoming almost mythical. What you receive now is often little more than a sack of dusty, fragmented bones and scraps of linen, harvested from the later, less elaborate burials of the Greco-Roman period, or from the mass graves of commoners. This is not the premium product your wealthy clients expect. You find yourself in a difficult position. Mumia is still one of your most profitable items. Your most important customers still ask for it by name. To simply say "I'm out of stock" is to admit failure, to lose face, and to send your best clients to your competitors. This shortage creates a kind of panic in the pharmaceutical world. Apothecaries and physicians begin to write anxious letters to each other, sharing tips on where to find reliable suppliers and complaining about the rampant fraud in the market. The connoisseurship that was once a point of pride now becomes a necessary survival skill. Every shipment has to be meticulously inspected for counterfeits, for modern bones mixed with ancient, for cheap resin used to mimic the appearance of authentic bitumen. A fascinating and slightly comical detail from this period is the rise of the mummy expert. These were men who claimed to have a special, almost supernatural ability to distinguish real mumia from fake. They would travel from city to city, charging apothecaries a hefty fee to come into their shop and authenticate their stock. They would perform elaborate rituals of smelling, tasting, and burning the powder, pronouncing one jar prime and another a worthless counterfeit, often with very little basis in fact. It was a perfect gift for an anxious and superstitious age. This scarcity also leads to a change in how the medicine is prescribed. In the past, a physician might have recommended a large and frequent dose. Now they begin to prescribe it more sparingly, reserving it only for the most serious cases and for the wealthiest patients. The recipes become more complex, mixing a tiny, precious pinch of true mumia with a dozen other, more common ingredients to stretch the supply. Historians still debate the true extent of this shortage. Was it a complete drying up of the supply or more of a market correction? The truth is likely somewhere in the middle. The trade never stopped completely, but it certainly entered a period of crisis. The era of cheap, plentiful mummies was over. You look at the dwindling supply in your big stone jar. It's your best seller, your crown jewel, but you can't get it anymore. Not the good stuff anyway. The demand is as high as ever, but the tombs are growing quiet and empty. The market abhors a vacuum. When a popular and profitable product becomes scarce, and the buyers are not particularly discerning, someone will always find a way to meet the demand. The solution that emerges is logical, profitable, and utterly horrifying. If you can't find enough long-dead people to sell, you'll just have to start making some new ones. The shortage of authentic pharaohs presents a classic business problem, a supply chain failure. And the solution, born out of cynical opportunism, is grimly predictable. If you can't get the real thing, you create a substitute. As the flow of genuine ancient mummies from Egypt slows to a trickle, a new, gruesome cottage industry springs up to fill the void. You are no longer in a respectable apothecary shop. You are in a place far from the public eye, a hidden cellar or a remote barn on the outskirts of a European city, or perhaps you are back in Egypt, in a squalid workshop in Alexandria where the local dealers have decided to vertically integrate their fraudulent operations. The work being done here is a secret, and for very good reason. The raw material is no longer an ancient Egyptian noble, it's something far more contemporary. The bodies are those of the unfortunates of your own time executed criminals, unclaimed paupers from the city morgue, victims of plagues or famines whose bodies are plentiful and, more importantly, free. The bodies of the marginalized and the forgotten, who had little value in life, suddenly become a valuable commodity in death. He led Per to a workshop where dozens of bodies were laid out in various stages of a horrifying process. These were not ancient, desiccated corpses. They were fresh, The dealer cheerfully explained that he used the bodies of slaves or others he could get his hands on to create his mummy. He had developed a recipe to mimic the ancient Egyptian methods, or at least to create a convincing facsimile. Pear was horrified, not just by the cannibalism, but by the sheer fraud of it all. He realized that his patients back in France were not consuming ancient pharaohs, but freshly dead paupers and criminals prepared in a filthy Alexandrian workshop. This practice of creating counterfeit mummies was called pis asphaltos, a term that combined the Greek words for pitch, asphalt, and well. You can guess the other part. It was a term of contempt used by those few who knew the difference to describe this ghoulish fake. The process itself was a grotesque parody of ancient embalming. The creators of these fakes were not priests performing a sacred ritual, they were butchers and chemists engaged in a morbid manufacturing process. They would eviscerate the bodies, just as the ancient Egyptians had, but without any of the ceremony. They would then cure the flesh. This could involve salting it, smoking it over a fire, or baking it in a low-heat oven to achieve the desired dryness and leathery texture. A particularly grim and little-known aspect of this was the use of condemned prisoners. In some parts of Europe, physicians and apothecaries could actually apply to the local authorities for the body of a recently executed criminal. The justification was often for anatomical study, but it's an open secret that many of these bodies were instead diverted into the production of medicinal compounds. The German physician Oswald Kroll, in the early 17th century, even published a recipe for a tincture made from the body of a young, red-headed man who had been hanged, as this was considered the most potent variety. Historians still argue about where this practice was more common in Europe itself, or in Egypt and the Middle East where the fakes were produced to be sold to Europeans. The evidence suggests it was happening in both places. The Alexandrian workshops, like the one Pear visited, were essentially producing fakes at the source, but apothecaries in Europe, desperate to meet demand, were not above a bit of grim DIY, creating their own fresh mummy from local ingredients. The rise of the counterfeit mummy maker represents a new level of depravity in our story. The original practice, while morbid, at least had a veil of antiquity and exoticist. You were consuming someone who had died thousands of years ago in a faraway, almost mythical land. But this was consuming your contemporaries. The person being ground into powder to cure your cough might have been the man hanged in the town square last Tuesday. The line between medicine and cannibalism, already blurry, has now been almost completely erased. It's a stark, gruesome reminder that when profit and superstition combine, the depths of human behavior can be very dark indeed. The demand for mummies, real or fake, is still strong, and you've decided to get into the manufacturing side of the business. It's a dark path, but a profitable one. So how do you do it? How do you turn a fresh corpse into a convincing replica of an ancient Egyptian mummy, a product that can fool even a discerning apothecary? You'll need a recipe, a step-by-step guide to this grim and secret art. Let's say you've acquired your raw material, a body unclaimed and anonymous from the city morgue. The first and most important step is to stop the natural process of decay. You need to dry it out, and quickly. Just like the ancient Egyptians, you must remove the internal organs. They are full of moisture and bacteria and are the first things to decompose. You make an incision down the abdomen and remove the stomach, intestines, liver, and lungs. You are not a priest, so there is no ceremony here. The organs are simply discarded. The heart, which the Egyptians often left in place, you also remove. There's no room for sentiment in this business. The brain too must go, lacking the delicate bronze hooks of the ancients. Your method is cruder, perhaps involving a hammer and a sharpened rod. The goal is to leave a hollow, clean cavity. Now you must desiccate the flesh. The Egyptians used natron, a natural salt found in the dry lake beds of the Nile, which was brilliant at drawing out moisture. You probably don't have access to that. But you have salt. Lots of it. You pack the body cavity with coarse salt, and you rub salt all over the skin, working it into every crease and fold. Then you bury the entire body in a large vat or a pit filled with more salt, and you leave it for 40 days, perhaps longer. Patient work of removing every last drop of water from the tissues. Alternatively, If you're in a hurry, you might use a more aggressive method. Some counterfeiters were known to use ovens. You could bake the body at a low, slow temperature, essentially turning it into a human jerky. This method is faster but riskier. Too much heat and you cook the flesh, too little and it rots. The smell, as you can imagine, would be distinctive and very difficult to explain to your neighbors. A truly strange and specific detail from the historical records of counterfeiters: the use of sand. Some recipes called for stuffing the body with hot, dry sand from a baker's oven, which would absorb moisture from the inside out. They would also bury the body in a pit of this hot sand, creating a sort of primitive convection of to speed up the desiccation process. After the body is thoroughly dried, it's a pale, stiff, and rather unconvincing husk. It doesn't look like the dark resin-coated mummies that are so prized. So you must give it the right color and aroma. You prepare a large cauldron of a dark, sticky mixture. The key ingredient is bitumen or asphalt, the very substance that started this whole story. You melt it down a black bubbling tar. To this, you add other ingredients to create the right ancient scent: myrrh, cassia, aloe, maybe even some cheap incense. You are creating a fraudulent perfume. You then take your dried minus-out corpse and immerse it completely in this hot black goo. You leave it to soak, allowing the mixture to penetrate the skin and stain the flesh a deep dark brown. This bath does two things: it gives the body the authentic appearance of an ancient mummy, and the bitumen acts as a powerful preservative, sealing the desiccated flesh from the air and moisture. The final step is to give your creation the look of a genuine Egyptian burial. You need linen wrappings. You can't use new white linen, it would be an obvious giveaway, so you take long strips of cloth and age them. You might stain them with tea, or bury them in the dirt for a few weeks to give them a yellowed, ancient look. Some of the more meticulous counterfeiters would even paint fake hieroglyphs on the linen strips, just a few symbols to add a touch of authenticity, knowing their European customers wouldn't be able to read them anyway. Then you wrap the body, layer after layer, tucking the ends carefully, mimicking the complex patterns you've seen on the real mummies that have passed through the market. A final coating of the warm bitumen mixture helps to glue the wrappings in place and complete the illusion. You now have your finished product. A counterfeit mummy. It's stiff, dark, dry, and wrapped in what looks like ancient linen. It has the right color and, if you've mixed your resins correctly, something close to the right smell. From here you can either sell it whole to a collector or an apothecary with a flair for the dramatic, or you can proceed to the final step, breaking it apart with a hammer and grinding it into a fine, anonymous powder. It's almost impossible to distinguish from the real thing. This recipe, or variations of it, is a closely guarded trade secret. Historians have had to piece it together from the writings of critics like Umber by analyzing the chemical composition of fake mummies that have been discovered. It's a testament to human ingenuity, but an ingenuity applied to a truly dark and macabre purpose. You successfully turn the forgotten dead, all to satisfy a market that, for the most part, doesn't know any better and probably doesn't want to. The proliferation of fakes, these freshly made mummies emerging from gruesome workshops, creates a new urgent problem for the serious, professional apothecary. Your reputation, and indeed the health of your clients, or so you believe, depends on the quality of your ingredients. You can't be seen to be selling a counterfeit you're made from a common criminal baked in an oven. You need to be able to tell the real from the fake. And so, the apothecary becomes a morbid connoisseur, a detective in a very peculiar field of study. You are back behind your polished counter, and a merchant has just brought you a sample of a new shipment. He claims it's the finest quality, direct from a newly discovered Taminsakava. But you've been burned before. You are the piece of dried, blackened flesh he's placed on the counter with a deep and practiced suspicion. The first and most important test is the smell. This is the one thing that counterfeiters found hardest to replicate. You pick up the fragment and hold it to your nose, inhaling deeply. A genuine high-quality mummy, according to the experts of your day, should have a distinct balsamic and not unpleasant aroma. It's the scent of ancient resins like myrrh and cedar, aged fall-smelling bitumen or asphalt, will have a harsh, pitch-like odor. If it smells like a freshly tarred road, you know it's a fake. If it smells of decay, it's a badly made fake, and you dismiss the merchant immediately. Next, the visual inspection. The color and texture are crucial. The flesh of a true mummy should be a deep, glossy black or a rich, dark brown. It should be hard, brittle, and break with a clean, sharp snap. You examine the fragment closely. Are there any telltale signs of its modern origin? Perhaps a shred of a more modern looking fabric mixed in with the linen, or a texture that looks more like overcooked meat than desiccated flesh. Then comes the taste test. As stomach churning as it sounds, many apothecaries would place a tiny crumb of the powder or a splinter of the flesh on their tongue. The taste was supposed to be bitter and pungent, but not acrid. Any hint of a chemical or overly terry flavor was a sign of a forgery. But the most dramatic and supposedly definitive test was trial by fire. You take a small piece of the mummy and place it in a metal dish over a candle flame. You watch the results with the intensity of an alchemist. A true mummy, when burned, was said to melt like a resinous wax, releasing a fragrant, perfumed smoke. A counterfeit, made from flesh simply coated in bitumen, would sputter and char, producing a thick, black, and foul-smelling smoke. This was considered the gold standard of authentication. One can only imagine the strange and unpleasant smells that must have filled the back rooms of European pharmacies as this procedure was carried out. A truly bizarre, and frankly disgusting, piece of connoisseurship related to the white mummies. These were bodies that had been preserved not by bitumen and resins, but simply by being buried in the hot, dry desert sand. They were naturally desiccated. Some physicians believed this natural mumia was purer and more potent than the artificially embalmed kind. The problem was, these bodies were often pale and brittle, and didn't look like what customers expected. Dealers would often take these genuine, naturally preserved mummies and coat them in bitumen to make them look more like the popular blackened ideal. It's a perfect example of the market's perception of authenticity triumphing over reality itself. This constant struggle to tell the real from the fake had a significant impact on the trade. It made apothecaries paranoid and secretive. When they found a reliable source of what they believed to be genuine mumia, they guarded the connection fiercely. It also, perhaps, began to plant the first, tiny seeds of doubt about the whole enterprise. When you have to spend so much of your time worrying about whether the medicine you're selling is a 3,000-year-old pauper, it might occur to you that the entire system is fundamentally flawed. But that realization is still a long way off. For now, you are a professional, proud of your discerning palate and your sharp eye. You complete your tests on the merchant sample. It smells a bit too much like pitch, and the smoke from the flame is thick and greasy. You wave your hand in disgust, dismiss the merchant from your shop, and go back to guarding the small, dwindling supply of what you believe to be your genuine, authentic, and incredibly valuable stock of powdered peep. As our story drifts into the 18th and early 19th centuries, a strange thing happens. The Enlightenment is beginning to dawn, and the old medical theories of humors and signatures are slowly, very slowly, starting to lose their grip on the scientific mind. Mumia as a serious medicine is beginning to fall out of fashion among the intellectual elite. But the mummies themselves, they are about to get a second, and even more bizarre, lease on life. They are moving out of the apothecary shop and into the drawing room. The era of the mummy unwrapping party has arrived. You are no longer a desperate tomb raider or a cynical apothecary. You are a member of the English upper class in, let's say, 1834th. You've received an invitation to the home of a wealthy friend, a doctor and antiquarian named Thomas Pettigrew. The invitation is for an evening of conversation, music, and a mummy unwrapping. This is the hottest ticket in London. You arrive at his elegant townhouse. The rooms are filled with the cream of society, poets, politicians, artists, and aristocrats, all buzzing with a mixture of intellectual curiosity and ghoulish excitement. After drinks and polite conversation, the main event begins. Servants carry in a long, heavy object wrapped in cloth and place it on a specially prepared table in the center of the room. It is an authentic, intact Egyptian mummy, purchased by Pettigrew from a dealer for a handsome sum. Pettigrew, who would become known as Mummy Pettigrew, stands before his audience like a master showman. He gives a scholarly lecture on the history of ancient Egypt, on their burial customs, and on the art of mummification. He is a genuine scholar, one of the pioneers of British Egyptology, but he is also a performer. Then with a flourish he takes a small knife and a pair of shears and makes the first cut into the ancient linen wrappings. A collective gasp goes through the room. The air, which moments before smelled of beeswax scandals and expensive perfume, is now tinged with a new scent, the dry, dusty, resinous aroma of the tomb. He begins to unroll the bandages. Layer after layer. It's a slow, meticulous process. The linen is brittle and often stuck fast with hardened bitumen. He calls on gentlemen from the audience to assist him. A great honor. You might be one of them, holding a limb steady as Pettigrew carefully snips away a stubborn piece of cloth. As the layers come off, small treasures are sometimes revealed, tucked into the wrappings by ancient priests, a string of faience beads, a small carved amulet, a scarab beetle. Pettigrew holds them up for the crowd to admire, explaining their symbolism. The atmosphere is a strange cocktail of a university lecture, a surgical demonstration, and a magic show. A weirdly specific detail of these events is that they were often catered. Guests would nibble on cakes and sip champagne while watching a 3,000-year-old body being dissected a few feet away. It was considered a perfectly respectable, even educational, form of after-dinner entertainment. Finally, after what seems like hours, the last layer of linen is removed. The body itself is revealed. The skin is dark, leathery, and shrunken against the bones. The face is a hollowed out mask, but still recognizably human. A profound silence falls over the room. The audience, which had been chatting and laughing, now stares at the revealed corpse. It is a moment of confrontation with mortality, antiquity, and the shared humanity that connects their world of gaslight and steam engines to the world of pharaohs and pyramids. Historians still debate the motivations behind these bizarre events. Was it genuine scientific inquiry? Was it a morbid fascination with the macabre? Or was it the ultimate expression of colonial power, the idea that this ancient, once powerful civilization was now just a collection of objects to be bought, displayed, and dismantled for their entertainment? After the unwrapping, the mummy was effectively destroyed as an archaeological specimen. The bandages were often given away to the guests as souvenirs. You might go home with a small square of 3,000-year-old linen to display on your mantelpiece. The body itself might be dissected further by Pettigrew and his medical colleagues, or its bones might be added to a private collection. These parties represent a crucial turning point in the mummy's journey. It is no longer primarily seen as a source of medicine. The idea of eating it now seems crude and superstitious to this enlightened crowd. Instead, the mummy has become an object of scientific curiosity and a source of thrilling, macabre entertainment. It has moved from the realm of internal consumption to the realm of the public spectacle. But the fundamental act of desecration remains. The body is still being violated, its eternal rest disturbed. It's just being done now with an air of intellectual superiority, under the bright lights of a London drawing room instead of the dusty darkness of an apothecary's back room. The mummy's long, strange journey has taken it from a sacred tomb to a medicine jar, and then to the center stage of a Victorian parlor. But its career change isn't over yet. As the unwrapping parties reach their peak, a fragment of this ancient material takes one final, unexpected turn. It ends up on the tip of a paintbrush. The mummy becomes an artist's secret ingredient. You are now in a different kind of London studio. Not a surgeon's salon, but the cluttered, light-field attic of a painter in the mid-19th century. The air smells of linseed oil, turpentine, and that same, faint, dusty, sweetish scent that has followed us through this entire story. On a small table, next to the neat rows of paint tubes and vibrant blues, reds, and yellows is a small, unassuming lump of a dark, brownish material. This is mummy brown. It was a real, and for a time incredibly popular artist pigment. It was made, as the name gruesomely suggests, from the ground-up remains of both human and Egyptian mummies. The process of making the pigment was simple enough. You would take a chunk of a mummy. It didn't need to be high quality. Just dry and grind it into a very fine powder. You would then mix this powder with a binder, typically linseed oil and a drying agent like bitumen or frankincense, to create a usable oil paint. The result was a rich, warm, and wonderfully translucent brown. It was perfect for creating deep shadows, glazing over other colors to add warmth and depth, and painting the moody, atmospheric skies so popular in the Romantic and pre-Mummies Raphaelite eras. You, as an artist, love this color. It flows beautifully from the brush. It has a unique transparency that other earth tones like burnt umber or sienna just can't match. It becomes a staple on your palette. You use it to paint the deep, velvety shadows in a portrait, the rich mahogany of a tabletop, or the somber tones of a historical or biblical scene. The paint was first produced commercially in the late 18th century, but it truly hit its stride in the 19th. It was sold by all the most reputable artist suppliers. You could walk into a shop like Robertson's or Winsor Newton and buy a tube of mummy brown, just as easily as you could buy a tube of vermilion or cobalt blue. The label would state the contents quite plainly. There was no secret about what you were buying. A particularly weird and specific detail is that the quality of the paint was said to vary depending on which part of the mummy was used. Some sources claimed that mummy flesh produced a better, richer brown than the powdered bones. And just like with the medicine, there were debates about authenticity. An artist might complain that his latest tube of mummy brown was of inferior quality, likely made from a modern counterfeit mummy rather than a true ancient one. Imagine two distinguished Victorian painters, members of the Royal Academy, arguing over whether their brown paint was made from a genuine 18th dynasty nobleman or a 19th-century pauper. The use of this pigment was widespread. Many famous artists from the period are believed to have had mummy brown on their palettes. The French painter Martin de Rolling's masterpiece, The Interior of a Kitchen, is famous for its beautiful, luminous brown tones, which many art historians believe were achieved using the pigment. Edward Burne-Jones, a prominent pre-Mummies Raphaelite painter, was a known user of the color, at least until he made a rather shocking discovery. The story goes that Burne-Jones was painting in his studio one day when some friends came to visit. They were admiring his work and asked him about the lovely brown he was using. He casually replied, "It's mummy brown." His friends then asked what it was made of. When he was told that it was, in fact, made from actual mummies, he was so horrified that he immediately went into his studio, grabbed his tube of mummy brown, and insisted on giving it a proper, ceremonial burial in his garden. He never used the color again. This anecdote, whether entirely true or not, captures the shifting attitudes of the late 19th century. What was once casually accepted was beginning to feel ghoulish and barbaric. The knowledge of the paint's true origin was always there, but for a long time, people just didn't think about it too deeply. It was just a name, mummy brown. Burne-Jones's theatrical horror was a sign that times were changing. The use of the paint slowly died out, partly because of this growing sense of moral unease, but also for practical reasons. The supply of mummies was, as we know, dwindling. And more importantly, the quality was inconsistent. One batch of mummy brown might be perfect, while the next, made from a different mummy, might have a completely different tone and texture. Artists need consistency, and mummy brown was anything but. By the early 20th century, most manufacturers had ceased production. The last major supplier, the London-based company Robertson's, claimed they ran out of their last mummy in 1964. The manager said, "We might have a few odd limbs lying around somewhere, but we're not prepared to sell them." The age of painting with people was finally, officially over. The journey of the mummy from medicine to spectacle, to a tube of paint, had reached its final bizarre destination. While Victorian artists were giving their paint tubes a ceremonial burial, a quieter but far more significant burial was also taking place, the burial of the ideas that had supported this entire bizarre practice for centuries. The first voices of doubt, which had long been isolated whispers, were now growing into a chorus of skepticism and condemnation, driven by the steady march of reason and science. Let's go back in time a little to the 16th century. The mummy-eating craze is at its peak. Kings are taking it, apothecaries are stocking it, and medical textbooks are praising it. To speak out against it is to go against the entire medical establishment. It's like a doctor today questioning the use of antibiotics. It would be professional suicide. But a few brave, stubborn, and clear-minded individuals did just that. You are in the tent of a military surgeon on a chaotic battlefield in the 1560 seconds. The surgeon is a Frenchman named Ambroise. We met him briefly when he discovered the counterfeit mummy workshops in Alexandria. He is one of the greatest surgeons of his era, a man who values direct observation and practical experience over blind adherence to ancient texts. He is cleaning a wound, and his assistant offers him a mummy-based salve to apply. Pear pushes it away in disgust. He had returned from Egypt not just horrified by the fraud, but fundamentally questioning the entire premise of the medicine. He wrote about his experiences, his voice dripping with sarcasm and contempt. He argued that it was absurd to think that the wicked body of some impoisoner or leprous or plague-stricken man, embalmed by a cozening and crafty knave, could possibly have any healing properties. He ridiculed the idea that a substance taken from dead bodies could somehow give life and health to the living. It is a thing, he wrote, not only ridiculous but inhuman to tear up the bodies of the dead. Pear's argument was twofold. First, he attacked the fraud. He exposed the fact that most mummy was fake, made from the diseased and dishonorable dead. Second, and more radically, he argued that even if you had the genuine, powdered remains of King Tutankhamun himself, it would still be a useless and disgusting medicine. He called the practice a form of cruel inhumanity, and urged his fellow physicians to stop prescribing it. And for a long time, he was largely ignored by the medical elite. Over the next century, others joined the chorus. In England, a physician and writer named Sir Thomas Browne, in his 1658 work, Hydrae Ota Phi, Urn Burial, reflected on the strange fate of the great Egyptian kings. He wrote, with a kind of melancholic irony, that mummy is become merchandise, Miz rain cures wounds, and pharaoh is sold for balsams. He pointed out the profound and terrible irony that a civilization so obsessed with preserving their bodies for eternity had ended up as a common drug, to be sold in shops. He questioned not just its efficacy, but its morality, asking if we were not dooming our own souls by consuming the bodies of others. A particularly niche but fascinating argument against mumia came from the world of theology. Some religious scholars began to debate the implications of the practice for the Christian doctrine of the resurrection. The belief is that on Judgment Day, the dead will rise again in their physical bodies. So, the question was, what happens to the bits of an Egyptian mummy that have been consumed by a European, digested, and incorporated into their own body? At the resurrection, who gets that molecule? It's a theological headache of the highest order, and while it might seem silly to you now, it was a genuinely serious concern for people of the time. Historians are still debating why it took so long for these skeptical voices to gain traction. The power of tradition was immense. The great medical authorities of the past, Galen, Avicenna, had all recommended mumia. To question it was to question the very foundations of Western medicine. Furthermore, there was no good alternative. With no understanding of germs or cellular biology, the available cures for most diseases were limited, and in the world of medical uncertainty, a famous, expensive, and mysterious cure from a far-off land had a powerful psychological appeal. But the seeds of doubt planted by men like Pear did not die. They lay dormant, waiting for the intellectual climate to change. They were waiting for the scientific revolution, for the moment when observable evidence would finally begin to triumph over ancient authority. The arguments of these early skeptics were like the first few cracks in the foundation of a very large, very old, and very strange building. The whole edifice wouldn't collapse overnight, but the end was now inevitable. The practice of prescribing powdered people for your headache was finally being called out for what it was: not just ineffective, but inhuman. The scientific arguments of men like Pear are chipping away at the medical legitimacy of mumia. But there's another, more unsettling question that has been lurking in the shadows of our story all along. A question that people have been studiously avoiding for centuries. Now, as the age of reason dawns, it is finally dragged out into the light. You have to confront the uncomfortable moral implications of your favorite medicine. You have to ask yourself, is this cannibalism? You are in a London coffee house in the early 18th century. The air is buzzing with debate and new ideas. Men in powdered wigs are arguing passionately about politics, philosophy, and science over steaming cups of coffee. The conversation at your table turns to the latest travelers' tales from Egypt, and from there, to the peculiar medicine that is still, though less commonly, sold in the city's apothecary shop. For centuries, people had performed a series of impressive mental gymnastics to avoid the C word. It wasn't really cannibalism, they argued. First, the mummies were ancient. You were eating someone who had been dead for thousands of years. This great distance in time seemed to make it less personal, less transgressive. Second, it was medicine. You weren't eating flesh for nourishment or in a savage ritual. You were consuming it for your health, under the direction of a learned physician. It was a clinical, sanitized act. Third, the bodies had been transformed. They had been embalmed, cured, and turned into a dry, resinous substance. It was no longer truly human flesh. It was a new material, a drug called mumia. These justifications had worked for a surprisingly long time. They allowed a sophisticated, Christian society to engage in a practice that it would have condemned as barbaric and heathenish in any other context. Europeans were, at this very same time, exploring the globe and sending back horrified reports of cannibal tribes in the New World and the Pacific. They used these stories as proof of the savagery of these primitive peoples, and as a justification for colonization. The staggering hypocrisy of writing these reports while simultaneously prescribing a medicine made from human flesh was seemingly lost on them. But now in the coffee house, the justifications are starting to sound a little thin. A young man at your table, a student of the new philosophies, raises the question directly. If we condemn the savages of the Americas for eating their enemies, he asks, by what right do we consume the ancient kings of Egypt? Is our excuse of medicine really so different from their excuse of ritual? A hush falls over the table. It's an uncomfortable question. This moral awakening is partly driven by a new wave of travel literature. As more Europeans travel to Egypt and see the tombs and the mummies for themselves, they begin to write about them in a new way. They are no longer just a source for a curious drug. They are the remains of a great and noble civilization. The travel writer William Lithgow, in the early 17th century, expressed his disgust at the beastly meningitis of the apothecaries who turned these honorable corpses into medicine. This new perspective, one of respect for the ancient Egyptians, makes the act of eating them seem less like medicine and more like desecration. A particularly strange and dark corner of this debate concerns the execution scaffold. We've talked about the use of criminals' bodies to make counterfeit mummies, but there was a related folk medicine tradition that was much more open and direct. It was widely believed that the bodies of the recently executed held a powerful life force. It was common for people suffering from epilepsy or other ailments to gather at public executions and pay the executioner for a cup of the still warm blood of the condemned. This was called executioner's medicine. While not exactly mumia, it existed alongside it, part of the same universe of corpse-based cures. Historians are still debating the relationship between these two practices. Was one an extension of the other, or did the official, sanitized mumia in the pharmacy make the cruder, bloodier practices at the scaffold seem more acceptable? As the 18th century progresses, the argument that mumia is a form of cannibalism becomes more mainstream. The practice is increasingly framed as a relic of a superstitious and barbaric past. Satirists and playwrights begin to mock it. In a play from the period, a foolish old doctor might be seen proudly prescribing a dose of powdered pharaoh, much to the amusement of the younger, more enlightened characters. The word cannibalism is a powerful one. It recasts the entire story. The noble physician is no longer a healer, as a purveyor of human flesh. The respectable apothecary is no longer a merchant of fine rugs, as a dealer in the dead. You, the patient, are no longer taking a sophisticated cure, you are engaging in a savage act. This moral revulsion combined with the growing scientific skepticism is the one-2 punch that will finally knock mumia off its pedestal. The medicine is not just useless, it's immoral. It's not just bad science, it's a form of cannibalism that your society has been pretending to be above for centuries. The coffee house debate signals the end. You can feel the consensus shifting in the room. The age of eating mummies is drawing to a close, not with a bang, but with a growing sense of collective embarrassment and shame. The moral and scientific arguments are piling up. The coffee house debates are spreading, but to truly dismantle a system of belief that has stood for over 700 years, you need more than just disgust and debate. You need a new system to replace it. The final, decisive blow to the practice of eating mummies comes not from a critique of the old ways, but from the birth of an entirely new way of understanding the world, and your place in it. The dawn of modern science is here. You are now in a lecture hall at a European university in the late 18th or early 19th century. Gone are the dusty charts of the four humours. Instead, the professor is using a new and marvelous tool, the microscope. He is showing you things you have never seen before. Tiny, wriggling animalcules in a drop of water. The intricate cellular structure of a plant leaf. The organized and specialized tissues of the human body. This is a revolution. The old, philosophical view of the body as a sack for competing fluids is being replaced by a mechanical, chemical, and biological understanding. Illness is no longer seen as an imbalance of vague, elemental forces. It is seen as a malfunction of a specific part of the machine. A disease of the lungs is a problem with the lungs is a problem with the lungs, not an excess of phlegm. A problem with the liver is a failure of a chemical process, not an overabundance of yellow bile. In this new world, where does mummy fit? It doesn't. The entire logic that supported its use has crumbled to dust, just like the mummies themselves. The idea that a hot and dry substance could cure a cold and moist illness now sounds like childish nonsense. Your professor would laugh at the idea. He would ask for the mechanism. How does it work? What chemical compound in the mummy is having what specific effect on which part of the body? Of course, there are no answers. The doctrine of signatures, the idea that a substance that resists decay can transfer that property to a living person, is also dismissed as magical thinking. It's a beautiful metaphor, perhaps, but it has no place in a world of chemistry and biology. The professor explains that the preservative qualities of a mummy come from specific chemical interactions, the dehydration caused by natron salts, the antibacterial properties of the resins. These are not mystical virtues that can be absorbed through ingestion. They are just chemical reactions. To think you can gain longevity by eating a mummy, he might say, is like thinking you can learn to fly by eating a bird. The very idea of a panacea, a cure minus all, becomes suspect. Science is revealing the body to be an incredibly complex system. The notion that a single substance, no matter how exotic, could cure everything from a headache to a broken bone to the plague becomes self-minus evidently absurd. Medicine is becoming a science of specific ailment. You need a specific drug for a specific ailment. One of the most fascinating casualties of this scientific shift is the concept of the life force. The old belief which drove the demand for mummies of those who died violently was that a vital spirit or energy remained in the flesh after death. But the new science has no room for such ghosts in the machine. The body is a collection of cells and chemical processes. When it dies, the processes stop. There is no lingering energy to be harvested. The extra price you paid for the mummy of an executed gladiator was, it turns out, a complete waste of money. Historians are still tracing the exact timeline of this change. It wasn't an overnight switch. The old humoral theories coexisted with the new scientific ideas for a surprisingly long time. A doctor in the 1780s might have read the chemical treatises in the morning and prescribed a mumia, minus-based plaster in the afternoon. But the trend was undeniable and irreversible. By the early 1800s, no serious, university-educated physician would be caught dead prescribing mumia. It was relegated to the world of folk remedies, rural apothecaries and quacks. The science that is dismantling the medical case for eating mummies is also, simultaneously, creating a new reason to value them. The rise of modern chemistry allows scientists to analyze the resins and materials used in mummification. revealing the incredible technical skill of the ancient Egyptians. The development of anatomy and pathology creates an interest in studying the mummies themselves for evidence of ancient diseases and lifestyles. They are no longer a potential cure, but a priceless source of data. You leave the lecture hall, your mind buzzing. The world seems different now, more ordered, more understandable. You walk past an old apothecary shop on your way home. In the window you see a dusty, forgotten minus-looking stone jar, still labeled Mumia Vera Get Piaka. A few years ago, you might have looked at it with a sense of awe and mystery. Now, you see it for what it is, a relic. A symbol of a bygone era of magical thinking. A monument to a colossal, centuries-long, and very gruesome mistake. The scientific revolution has not just killed the mummy as a medicine. It has performed a definitive autopsy on the idea itself. And the verdict is in the cure was nothing but a delusion. The scientific revolution has dismantled the medical rationale for eating mummies, and the Enlightenment has exposed its moral bankruptcy. The practice is now relegated to the fringes, a relic of a superstitious past. But one final, major event is needed to complete the mummy's transformation in the European imagination. It needs to be definitively rebranded. And that event arrives with the sound of cannons and the unfurling of the French tricolor on the banks of the Nile. Napoleon Bonaparte's expedition to Egypt in 1798 changes everything. You are no longer a patient, a doctor, or an artist. You are a young scholar, a savant, one of the 167 scientists, engineers, artists, and intellectuals that Napoleon has brought with him on his military campaign. Your job is not to fight, but to study, to measure, to draw, and to understand everything you can about this ancient and mysterious land. You are part of the birth of a new science, modern Egyptology. When you land in Egypt, you are stepping into a world that, for most Europeans, exists only in the half-mythological accounts of the Bible and ancient Greek historians. And your mission is to replace that myth with fact. You are armed with the latest tools of the Enlightenment, theodolits for surveying, pencils and paper for precise architectural drawings, and a rigorous, systematic approach to observation. You and your colleagues fan out across the country, following in the wake of Napoleon's army. While the soldiers are fighting the Mamluks, you are battling the sands of time. You venture into tombs that have been sealed for millennia, but you are not looking for bodies to grind into medicine. You are looking for knowledge. You are one of the first to enter a tomb not as a robber, but as a researcher. You don't see a potential cure, my soul, you see an artifact. You don't smash the sarcophagus, you measure it. You don't tear the wrappings off the mummy, you sketch them, noting the intricate patterns and the placement of amulets. The hieroglyphs on the walls are not mysterious magical symbols, they are a language, a code that you must crack. And one of your colleagues, a brilliant young man named Jean-Francois Champollion, will do just that a few years later, using the Rosetta Stone which was discovered by a French soldier during this very expedition. This is a profound, fundamental shift in perspective. The mummy is no longer a commodity. It is a time capsule. It is a priceless historical document, a key to understanding the daily life, the religion, the science, and the art of one of the world's great civilizations. The body of the ancient Egyptian is finally, after centuries of being seen as a raw material, being recognized for what it is, the most important artifact of all. A small but telling detail from this period is the reaction of the French savants to the local mummy trade. They were utterly appalled. They saw the tomb raiders and the mummy dealers not as suppliers for a legitimate medicine, but as ignorant vandals, destroying a precious and irreplaceable cultural heritage for a quick profit. They wrote scathing reports back to Paris about the scale of the destruction, is that their own European ancestors had created the very market that drove this destruction. This new generation of scholars, however, saw themselves as entirely different. They were here to save history, not to eat it. The result of this massive scholarly effort was the Description de l'Egypte, a monumental, multi-volume work that was published in the years following the expedition. It was filled with thousands of incredibly detailed drawings of temples, artifacts, and yes, mummies. For the first time, the general public in Europe could see what these things actually looked like, presented not as ghoulish curiosities, but as objects of scientific and historical wonder. This publication sparked a wave of Egyptomany across Europe. Suddenly, everything Egyptian was fashionable. Ladies wore jewelry with scarab motifs, architects designed buildings with Egyptian-style columns, and every major city in Europe wanted to have an Egyptian wing in its museum. This is the final nail in the coffin for the mummy-medicine trade. How can you grind up and swallow something that your society has just declared to be a priceless work of art, a treasure of world history? You can't. The cultural value of the mummy has become infinitely greater than its medicinal value, which science has already proven to be zero. Napoleon's expedition, though a military failure, was a spectacular scientific and cultural success. It effectively reframed the mummy in the Western mind forever. It took the mummy out of the hands of the apothecary and gave it to the museum curator. It took it off the shelf of cures and placed it on a pedestal, behind velvet ropes and under glass. The debate over whether you should eat the mummy is over. The new debate is about who has the right to own it, to display it. A new, and much more complex, chapter in the mummy's story is beginning, but the bizarre, 700-year-long chapter about its use as a miracle drug has, at last, come to a definitive end. The great intellectual and cultural shifts have taken place. Napoleon's savants have rebranded the mummy as a historical treasure, and scientists have dismissed its medicinal properties as pure fantasy. The practice is, for all intents and purposes, dead. But ideas, even discredited ones, have a long and stubborn half-minded life. They linger in the quiet corners of society long after the mainstream has moved on. You are now in the late 19th, perhaps even the early 20th century. You are a curious traveler, a folklorist, maybe, wandering through a remote, forgotten village in a rural corner of Europe. You pass by a small, ancient-looking apothecary shop, the kind that seems to have been bypassed by the march of time. The windows are thick with the dust of decades, and the sign above the door is faded and peeling. On a whim, you decide to go inside. The interior is even more of a time capsule than the exterior. It smells of dried herbs and old paper. The shelves are filled with remedies that have long since vanished from the pharmacies of the city's jars of dried beetles, strange minus-looking roots, and tinctures in dark, corked bottles. The old man behind the counter seems as ancient as his store. You browse the dusty shelves, and then you see it. Tucked away on a high shelf in the back behind a row of more common herbal remedies is a single, small, stone jar. It looks exactly like the ones that were so proudly displayed centuries ago. The label, written in a fine, spittery script, is faded but still legible Mumia Vera. You ask the apothecary about it. He takes the jar down from the shelf with a sigh, as if he hasn't touched it in years. He tells you that yes, it is real Mumia. His grandfather bought it in the port city decades ago, when such things were still available. He keeps it, he says, more for tradition than for anything else. You ask if anyone still buys it. He shakes his head, saying almost never. The young doctors, they laugh at it, he explains. They have their new chemical pills. He pauses, then leans in a little closer, adding that sometimes an old person will come in. Someone with a bad cough that nothing will touch, or a pain in their bones that the new medicines can't soothe, and they will ask for it. They remember their grandparents using it. For them, he says, it is still the strongest medicine. This is the final phase of Mumia's life as a drug. It has become a folk remedy. It has retreated from the centers of learning and commerce to the very fringes of society, kept alive by old tradition and the persistence of belief in the old ways. It is now sold not as a mainstream cure, but as a kind of last resort, a magical elixir for when all else fails. A fascinating, and rather sad, piece of evidence for this lingering belief comes from, of all places, the United States. In the early 20th century, there were still some traditional POW-WOW or folk magic practitioners in rural areas like Pennsylvania who prescribed mummy powder for certain ailments. An inventory of a traditional German-American folk healer's kit from this period might include various herbs, charms, and a small, precious vial of powdered mummy, likely imported from Europe a century earlier and passed down through the family. The jar the apothecary holds is probably the last of its kind you will ever see. It is an artifact of one. Historians who study the end of this practice often look at old pharmaceutical catalogues. They can trace the decline year by year. In the 1880s, you might still find mummy listed for sale by major chemical suppliers like Merck in Germany. By the early 1900s, it's almost completely gone. But with a note of caution as long as stock lasts. The apothecary places the jar back on the high shelf. It is a lonely and embarrassing relic. It represents a past that the modern world of medicine is trying to forget. It's a symbol of the ignorance and superstition of a bygone age. The jar and its contents have become a skeleton in the family closet of Western medicine. You thank the old man and leave the shop, stepping back out into the bright sunlight of the modern world. The sight of that last jar on the shelf is a powerful reminder of how long an idea can survive. The great debates in the universities are one thing, but the beliefs of ordinary people, passed down through generations, are another. The official story of Mumia ended with the dawn of Egyptology and modern science. But the unofficial story, the ghost of the idea, haunted the back shelves of rural pharmacies for another 100 years, a quiet, dusty testament to a 700-year-old medical delusion. The last jar of Mumia collects dust on a forgotten shelf, a ghost of a medicine no longer believed in. The era of consumption in every sense of the word is over. The mummy is now safe from the mortar and pestle, safe from the artist's palette, and safe from the surgeon's ghoulish party table. Its long, strange journey from a sacred object to a profane commodity is finally reversing. It is now on its final pilgrimage, from the medicine cabinet to the museum. You are in a museum now, a grand, imposing building with stone pillars and echoing halls, somewhere in London, Paris, or Berlin. The air is cool, quiet, and reverent. People speak in hushed tones. You are in the Egyptian wing, a space designed to inspire awe and wonder. And there, in the center of a large room, inside a climate-controlled glass case, lies a mummy. It rests on a bed of clean, white linen. The lighting is soft and carefully angled to highlight the intricate details of the sarcophagus it lies in. The painted face on the coffin lid stares up at the ceiling with a serene, timeless expression. Next to the case is a small plaque. It gives you the mummy's name, or at least the name of the person whose coffin this is. It tells you his title, a priest to Ammon. It tells you the dynasty he lived in, the materials the coffin is made from, and the meaning of the hieroglyphs painted on its surface. This is the mummy in its final incarnation, a specimen, an exhibit, a treasure of world heritage. It has been transformed from a thing to be consumed into a thing to be contemplated. Its value is no longer medicinal or commercial. It is historical, educational, and aesthetic. The journey to this glass box was a long one. It began with the Egyptologists of Napoleon's era, who first saw the mummies as sources of information. They and the generations of archaeologists who followed them developed new, non-destructive ways to learn their secrets. The unwrapping parties of Thomas Pettigrew, with their theatrical dissections, gave way to the careful, scientific unwrapping performed in the sterile environment of a museum laboratory. And then, even that became obsolete. The invention of the X-ray in 1895 was a revolutionary moment for the study of mummies. For the first time, you could see inside the wrappings without cutting a single thread. You, as a modern museum visitor, might see a screen next to the mummy's case displaying its X-ray image. You can see the skeleton inside, the amulets placed over the heart, evidence of healed bone fractures, even the lines of arrested growth in the teeth that tell of childhood illnesses. More recently, CT scans have allowed for the creation of incredibly detailed, 3-dimensional digital models of the person inside, allowing scientists to unwrap the mummy virtually, layer by layer. This technology has revealed some fascinating, and sometimes grim, details about the mummies that was old and consumed. Scans of mummies that were part of old private collections, the kind that might have ended up as medicine, have shown that many were ancient fakes. Not modern counterfeits, but fakes made in ancient Egypt itself. A beautifully wrapped mummy might be scanned only to reveal that it contains nothing but a collection of random animal and human bones, or even just modern sticks, cobbled together by an unscrupulous ancient priest to cheat a grieving family. The fraud that plagued the European apothecaries, it turns out, had its roots in the very civilization they so admired. The mummy in the glass case is now the subject of a new and very different kind of debate, one that historians and curators are still grappling with today. Is it right to display human remains in this way? Are we, in our own scientifically enlightened manner, still committing a form of desecration? By putting this person, this priest of Ammon, on display for millions of tourists to gaze at, are we not violating his final wish for a peaceful, undisturbed eternity? Many museums are now wrestling with this question, with some choosing to display only the sarcophag, while moving the bodies themselves to private storage, accessible only to researchers. You look at the mummy, lying still and silent in its perfectly lit, perfectly preserved environment. It has been on an incredible journey. It was created with sacred rites to ensure a soul's eternal life. It was then ripped from its eternal home by desperate men. It was sold in a chaotic market, dismembered and smuggled across the sea. It was ground into a powder and swallowed as a cure for a headache. It was unrolled for the amusement of a dinner party. Its dust was mixed with oil to paint a sunset. It lingered as a ghost in a dusty rural pharmacy. And now here it is, at rest in a way, protected, studied, and in its own strange way, revered once more. It is no longer Mumia, the drug. It is the mummy, the historical artifact. Its long, bizarre, and often brutal detour through the world of medicine is finally over. It has, at last, achieved a new kind of immortality, one its creators could never have possibly imagined: the immortality of a museum piece. The mummy in the museum seems to be the end of the story. It rests in its glass case, the silent testament to a bizarre chapter in human history. The jars of mummy are gone, the unwrapping parties are a distant memory, and the tubes of mummy brown are a collector's curiosity. But is the story really over? The echoes of Mumia, the strange legacy of this 700-year-old delusion, still linger in some very unexpected corners of our modern world. You might think that our relationship with medicinal cannibalism is firmly in the past, and for the most part you'd be right. But the fundamental idea that the human body can be a source of powerful healing materials has not entirely vanished. It has just become far more scientific and, thankfully, consensual. Think about it. We use blood transfusions where the blood of a donor saves the life of a recipient. We transplant organs, hearts, livers, kidneys from one person to another. We use skin grafts to heal burn victims and bone marrow transplants to cure leukemia. In a way, this is the strange, sterile, and highly successful modern descendant of the same core idea that drove the mumia trade, the crucial and, of course, morally essential differences are consent, scientific understanding, and the fact that the donor is not a long-dead, looted pharaoh. But the echo is there. The human body is still, in a very real sense, a source of potent, life-saving medicine. There's also a strange and very niche echo in the world of alternative medicine. While no one is selling powdered pharaohs anymore, you can still find remedies based on similar, pre-scientific ideas. For instance, some forms of traditional Chinese medicine still use ingredients derived from animal and, in very rare and controversial cases, human sources, based on principles that are not so different from the doctrine of signatures. Historians of medicine are still exploring these parallels, debating whether these are separate traditions or if there are deeper, cross-cultural patterns in how humans have viewed the body as a source of medicine. It's a contentious topic, but a fascinating one. But perhaps the most powerful and enduring legacy of the mumia trade is a negative one. It's a legacy of loss. Think of the sheer scale of the destruction. Hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of mummies were destroyed. Each one of those bodies was a potential library of information about the ancient world. Each one could have told us something about the diet, diseases, and genetics of the ancient Egyptian people. Each wrapping, each amulet, each coffin fragment contained clues that were lost forever when they were ground into powder. The science of paleo-pathology, the study of ancient diseases, could have been immeasurably richer. We could know so much more about the history of illnesses or malaria. The study of ancient DNA could have answered fundamental questions about the population genetics of the Nile Valley. The Mummy trade was, in essence, a massive, centuries-long bonfire of the evidence. It was an archaeological catastrophe from which the historical record will never fully recover. You are standing in front of that glass case in the museum again. You look at the mummy, this one survivor, and you realize it is not just a representative of its time, it is a refugee from ours. It is one of the lucky few that escaped the mortar and pestle. Its survival allows us to learn, but it also serves as a stark reminder of all the stories that were silenced, all the knowledge that was turned to dust and swallowed with a cup of wine. The loudest echo of the mummy trade is the profound silence left behind by all the mummies that are not in the museum. And so we leave the echo-filled halls of the museum, leave the lingering questions and the strange modern parallels. Our journey, which has taken us across centuries and continents, through the minds of kings, physicians, tomb raiders, and artists, is finally coming full circle. We are going back to the beginning, back to the silence, and back to the tomb. You are in the Valley of the Kings once more. But it is not the 16th century. You are not a desperate tomb raider with a mallet and a torch. It is tonight. The moon is full and bright, casting the jagged cliffs in a stark silver light. The air is cool and perfectly still. The tourist crowds are gone. The gates are locked. There is a profound, almost sacred silence that settles over this ancient valley of the dead. You find a place to sit, on a warm limestone rock overlooking the entrance to one of the tombs. You think back to the start of our story, to the little packet of brown powder in the apothecary's shop. It's almost impossible to connect that dusty, mundane transaction with the majestic stillness of this place. This valley was designed as a gateway to eternity, a hidden sanctuary where the souls of the great pharaohs could begin their journey into the afterlife, their bodies preserved forever. It was a place built on a foundation of the deepest faith in permanence. And for 700 years that faith was betrayed. This quiet, sacred landscape was turned into a quarry, a mine, but the raw material being extracted wasn't stone or gold. It was people. The silence of the tombs was broken, night after night, by the sounds of smashing stone and splintering wood. The sacred darkness was violated by the flickering, greasy light of raiders' torches. Tonight, however, the silence has returned. The tombs are sealed again, not with the mud bricks of the ancient priests, but with heavy iron gates. They are protected now by guards, by alarms, and by a global consensus that they are a shared treasure of humanity. The violation is over. The desecration has ceased. A strange and often debated question among Egyptologists is about the so-called curse of the pharaohs. The legend, which exploded after the opening of Tutankhamun's tomb in the 1922, suggests that a deadly curse afflicts anyone who disturbs a pharaoh's rest. Of course, scientifically, there is no curse. The deaths associated with the tomb opening were statistically normal for a group of that size and age. But perhaps the real curse was not a magical one aimed at the archaeologist. Perhaps the real curse was the one that fell upon the mummies themselves, the curse of being turned into a commodity. The curse of being consumed, the curse of having their eternal rest shattered for a medical fantasy. If there was a curse, it was the curse of Mummy, and that curse has finally been lifted. You look down at the dark, sealed entrance of a tomb below you. Inside, a king still lies in his golden coffin. He is one of the few who was missed by the ancient robbers and the more recent mummy hunters. He is intact. He is intact. He is at peace. The desire to consume him has been replaced by a desire to understand him. The hunger has been replaced by wonder. This transformation, this long, painful journey from medicine back to majesty, is the final destination of our story. The mummy has completed its odyssey through the strange and often irrational landscape of human belief. It has been an ingredient, a spectacle, a pigment, and a specimen. But here, tonight, in the silence of its original home, it is none of those things. It is simply what it was always meant to be, a silent testament to a civilization's profound hope for a life beyond life. The story of Mummy is a cautionary tale. It's about how easily a simple mistake, a misunderstanding of a single word can spiral into a centuries-long tragedy. It's about the seductive power of a good story and how readily we will believe in a miracle cure, especially when it is rare, expensive, and comes from a faraway land. It's a story about our endless, and often clumsy, struggle against our own mortality. But tonight, that struggle is quiet. Here, in the valley, there is only peace. The silence is no longer the silence of an empty, plundered tomb. It is the silence of a resting place, its sanctity, after a long and terrible interruption, finally restored. And so our story finds its way back to the quiet from which it began. The apothecary's shop has faded into memory. The dust of the tomb has settled once more. And the strange, long journey of the mummy has come to its final, peaceful rest. The thoughts of medicine and markets, of kings and counterfeiters, can all begin to soften now. Drifting away like smoke from a candle that has just been extinguished. There is nothing left to follow, nothing left to understand. There is only the stillness that the story leaves behind, a deep and comfortable quiet for you to rest in. The journey we have taken tonight was a long one. But it is over, and you can allow yourself to feel that sense of completion. A gentle release. You can let the weight of your body feel a little heavier. Your breath a little slower. As you sink just a little deeper into the softness beneath you, you are safe, and you are at peace. Here in the quiet valley of your own slumber, where only the most gentle dreams are waiting to find you. The final word has been whispered. If your mind is still gently stirring, you're welcome to drift into another of my stories. If not, I wish you a deep and peaceful slumber. Good night.